Hey guys, this is Savannah from earthandwater.co. Today I am with Justin Wessenberg. He is a international best-selling author, poet, and spiritual guide. You have a lot of books.
I do have a lot of books. I've I've published 8 books so far. I've got another four that I've written that are ready to publish. So um, it's just been kind of crazy, honestly. Um, yeah, that experience started about 5 or 6 years ago, and how it actually ended up starting is I had seen this crystal in a coffee shop. It was a huge candle quartz, like a foot and a half tall. And I saved up for months to buy it because I just thought it would be the coolest thing. So when I got home with it, I sat and meditated with it for maybe half an hour. And I had this message of like writing, like you need to write a book. And I started writing a verse from one of the poems I'd written years and years ago. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna put together a book. So at that point I could go back and kind of pull from all the poetry I had made for to make my first book. And that was over the course of about 6 years. But since I published that first book, I've written about 2 books a year for the last 5 years, and it's been pretty consistent, and it just happens kind of magically. So, yes, I'm an author, and yeah, it's been quite the journey. It's been quite the journey.
It's very impressive. Did you always know that you were going to write books and become an author one day?
I had no idea. I mean, I've always liked writing, and like in school, English and language arts came easier to me than math and science. So, writing's always been a skill of mine, and I do really enjoy writing. And I think actually what really started writing for me, there was kind of two things. The first thing is journaling, which I started doing maybe almost 10 years ago now. And I originally started as I heard about this practice called gratitude journaling, where you just write a few things per day that you're grateful for. And at the time I was like, I want to improve my mindset and I think I could do that. So I ended up uh, starting out, just doing like 3 bullet points a day. It took me like 10 seconds. And then eventually I thought, I kind of actually want to write more. And got to the point where I was writing an hour or two a day in my journal, just like collecting my thoughts. And that was actually one of the practices for me that really helped me to let go of all the clutter in my mind. Like I for a long time, I had a lot of, anxiety and just mental thoughts that kind of play on repeat all the time. And by taking all the stuff up here and just being able to like dump it onto the page, I don't have to think about it anymore. And it's just kind of parked. And if I ever want to go back and like revisit those thoughts, I can open my journal, I can read about it, I can think about it, but I'm not having to kind of replay the stuff in my mind over and over again. So I found that really helped me to kind of calm my mind, but also it helped me to write more. And I was really engaged with writing. And the second experience that really kind of kickstarted it was actually a really, really intense breakup because at the time I was just feeling so devastated, and everyone's probably had that experience at least once in their life. And, I didn't really know how to deal with my emotions. And as a man, like you're kind of taught not to express emotions in a lot of ways, which is silly, but that's just the cultural conditioning. And, um, but I didn't really know I didn't really know how because it's like my whole life I've been denying that part of myself. So I didn't really know how to express my emotions, and no guy really tells you how to do that. And so I started writing poetry about heartbreak, and part of my first book is a whole section on that kind of that feeling of like loss and devastation and anxiety and all those feelings. But also coming back to how can you love yourself? How can you be true to your heart and know the value that you have inherent in yourself. So those were kind of the two experiences that really kickstarted it. And after that happened, that's when I started writing poetry way more frequently, and it became like a therapeutic practice. And then eventually it became more of like a self-expression of just my soul, basically. So that's kind of how I began writing books.
Cool. So you haven't been writing poetry your entire life. This is it
No,
started in, or
I started enjoying poetry but I remember liking it in like grade 6. Like I was 11 years old when we were doing a poetry lesson. I remember reading poetry and writing poetry. I thought it was fun, but I never thought I would go anywhere with it. I just enjoyed doing it. And then around the age of, I want to say about 19, I started writing a couple poems and I started kind of dabbling in it. The first handful of poems were all inspired by nature and just like feeling that peace, being outside. I'm very much a nature person, but yeah, that was kind of the beginning. And then the heartbreak, that's when it really kind of kickstarted and I started writing more frequently. And then I don't really know. It kind of depends. I have spurts where sometimes I write a couple poems even in a day, and other times where, a couple weeks between writing poems, and it just kind of depends on what's going on. But, you know, on average, I probably write 60 or 70 poems per year. And I usually do about 33 poems per book. So it's kind of like every book has that. So I've just started kind of putting them into books because I have so many, and I want people to be able to read them and not just sit on my computer all day. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's awesome. Journaling is, I'm a huge advocate of journaling. I have a lot of journaling exercises in my content because it does give you so many outlets and tools to work with between, the gratitude journaling that's
Mhm.
just, counting your blessings. We have our primitive brains are really good at noticing the bad things around us because historically that's what we needed to notice in order to keep ourselves safe and to learn so that we, kept ourselves safe. And
Mhm.
we've had to, we're in this era now to where most of us are, generally speaking, pretty safe day by day.
Mhm.
But our minds still collect all of the bad things. And if you're unaware that that's how the brain works, then you can just really drown in all of the bad things. And you have to train it to start noticing the good things more than the bad. And gratitude journaling is definitely one of those ways that you can do that. And then, like you said, unpacking everything in your head,
Totally.
because, our minds are multidimensional. They're, if you close your eyes and really get in there, everything's 5D essentially.
Mhm.
It's spanning across. It goes up, down, multiplies, divides, all in the same time, the same moment. It's expanding and shrinking, and it really is the universe inside. And that can be really hard, especially with all of the emotions tied to them, to navigate. And overwhelm sets in pretty easily, anxiety. And when you write it all down, you're forced to take that 5 dimensional chaos essentially
Mhm.
and write it like in a line, and you lay it out, and
Mhm.
it becomes 2D, and that makes it easier to unpack, easier to understand. It gives you that third person perspective so that you can
Mhm.
look at it outside of yourself and kind of take that. So yeah, I'm a huge advocate for journaling. I think that is absolutely wonderful, and more people should be doing that.
Totally. Well, and you were kind of mentioning like finding safety and dealing with anxiety, and the journaling is one of the ways I look at it, but I kind of like the way I look at it is from sort of a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. Like, how can I heal on all levels to be my best self? And so for me, like when I'm feeling super anxious and I can't meditate and I can't sit still, the practice I actually go to is physical, and that's movement. And I find that whether if you just need to go for a run, do some push-ups, like anything, go for a walk out in nature, I find that that movement can really help when nothing else will work. When I'm feeling that crushing anxiety, which is not very fun, but sometimes happens. And for me, I also really discovered my movement practice during that same breakup I was talking about, when I found yoga. And I kind of fell in love with it right away. I was in a yoga class, and it was my second class, and the teacher had us in this deep hip opener pigeon. And I didn't know anything about it at the time, but I just remember bursting out into tears in the middle of class, and I couldn't stop crying. And it was just such a powerful release experience. And, that was probably the first time I've ever cried in public. So it was kind of like intense. It's really intense for me. At the end of the class, I remember telling the yoga teacher, I'm like, man, I think you just changed my life. And he's just like, oh, that's great to hear. He was really happy. But then I started going to yoga almost every day after that, for years, and, became a yoga teacher. I've been teaching yoga now for almost 8 years. And so for me, that was a really, that was kind of the start of my physical healing, because I found that like when I had that, you know, anxiety feeling or whatever, that movement and doing, for me especially doing yoga, but I also do nature walks, running, biking, like it can be whatever you need it to be. But for me it was yoga, had really helped me kind of like come back to myself, come back to my center, and find that inner peace. So uh if people watching this channel also like yoga, I totally recommend that as well, because it was really healing for me.
Absolutely, a lot of us find healing in yoga. I
Yeah.
did as well, because we section ourselves up into the mental, the body, the spirit, all of that,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can make more like easier sense of it, and so that we can start addressing each thing piece by piece and start chipping away at all of our quote unquote problems
Mm-hmm.
present themselves. But the reality of the matter is that it's all the same energetic being, and there is
Exactly.
no separation. There is no line where the body stops and the mind starts. It's all intertwined on a level that we can't possibly uh, really grasp at the moment. Because I mean, honestly, if we grasped it, if we understood it, we would have all over ascended already.
Exactly.
But yeah, but sectioning off into the physical, the physical for sure is definitely more easily understood to us than the rest of it. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, coming back to the physical to start meeting your problems in the middle where they meet the mind. You start, because the hip openers, that our
Yeah.
emotions, they get stuck in our body as actual tangible little energetic kinks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the movement helps move those on out and get those out and break up the stagnant. And so yeah, the physical can absolutely, and also outside of movement, um food is physical, and
Totally.
your environment is physical. I always, especially when you get anxious and overwhelmed, people who are prone to those, focusing on the physical is often a lot better way for them to get started with any kind of healing, healing
Mm-hmm.
trauma, healing health issues, healing anything, because it's tangible. You can touch it and you can see it
Totally.
and notice the progress with your eyes, with your senses, and all of that.
Totally. Well, and I think that's where most people start because I mean, that's kind of where I started when I really started my spiritual journey was with yoga. And, 'cause before that, I was just a construction worker, pretty normal guy. And then you get hit with this, soul crushing trauma and you're like, well, how do I heal now? And that's where I started with the physical. And that, of course, yoga helps with the mental and the journaling helped with the mental. And then with the emotional, it was for me writing poetry, being creative, like having a creative outlet,
Mm.
as well as breathing. Those I find both of those really help. And then after that is when I started getting more into the meditation and being more aware of my energy. I started taking energy healing classes, like all these kinds of things that just kind of take you deeper along that path towards, alignment with your soul, discovering your true self. And, one thing that you were mentioning was like that there's no separation. And I think for the reason that so many people end up feeling alone and kind of facing that suffering is because they're here to heal the wound of separation and come back into that unity state and that oneness with yourself and with the universe. And I think that's really the most powerful thing that anyone can do if they really want to focus on you know um, being their best selves and also serving the planet as well.
Yeah, because what's good for the individual is good for the whole, and vice versa.
Totally. Totally. So, that's kind of where I steer people with my teachings and the stuff that I focus on because I find that it's easy to kind of, help them get started and understand all the different aspects. And, same with my poetry. Like I really focused a lot on, helping people kind of discover their soul and discover their deeper meaning and their deeper purpose. Because I think as we uncover more parts of ourselves, it opens up more to be explored and more connection with yourself. And I think as people start connecting more, they're going to start healing more and aligning more, and things get easier. Like I think a lot of people uh you know feel like life is a lot of suffering, but it doesn't have to be that way when you are able to look at it from a different perspective.
Yeah, yeah. I saw something yesterday that said something like pain is, oh no, actually it was, I was editing an episode just before that we got on this call, and my guest that day had said that pain is inevitable, but suffering is not. And it's true. And but to be able to transcend that suffering uh means getting really uncomfortable at first, with the discomforts and facts, and accepting some
Hmm.
facets of life that we spend our entire life running from, like death, for
Hmm.
example. We everything that we do more or less is to distract us from the inevitable,
Hmm.
and becoming, understanding of the process and connecting to the process in a way that makes it almost comforting that we're all part of this cycle, and we go back to the same place that we came, and it
Hmm.
just repeats. And but nobody wants to face that. But it is getting better. We're becoming more accepting of things like that. And I always praise the internet for bringing us all of this information, because 20-30 years ago we didn't have the understanding that we have now. And things like yoga that can help us get to those points weren't prominent. There It's still illegal in some places. Where are you at?
I'm in Oregon.
Oregon. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
in Alabama. It's
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, it's illegal to teach yoga and meditation in schools where I'm at.
Oh, really?
Really? Isn't that
That's
crazy?
that's crazy.
Because there's nothing I find that would be more useful than teaching children how to move their bodies, get in touch with themselves, and like regulate their emotions. But there's so many misconceptions from where things come from, uh, to the point of I was advertising my yoga classes in a local Facebook group recently. Like this happened like 3 months ago, and I had several religious people attack my yoga practice,
Interesting.
and like on the Facebook post, and outright warn people to stay away.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and when I see things like that, it's clear to me that they just don't know anything about it because if
Oh,
they did,
sure.
they probably wouldn't think that way. And it's interesting because I mean, I'm originally from Canada, but my wife is American, so I moved here with her.
Okay.
But everywhere I've lived, like yoga was taught in schools, like in high school and elementary school, they
Really?
actually have yoga classes at gym, like they do yoga.
That is
So
awesome. That's what I would
yeah,
love to be able to do.
yeah. I mean, I know the owner of the studio I used to work at, she would go to the high school every week and teach yoga. So like, there's and they had like, some yoga classes for young children as well. Like and even here in Oregon, there's yoga classes for kids. Like it's normal. And so to see that people won't even that it's illegal is honestly kind of shocking. But I also think there's a lot of misconceptions because um I think that's where you see a lot of the duality is where people don't have the awareness or the understanding, and so they attack. And that's not necessarily the best thing to do, but they don't know anything different. And I think also too with like heavily, because I have friends who are religious who know I do yoga and I've tried yoga and like they have no problem with the yoga. So it's interesting. I guess there's just I'm not religious, so I don't know what happens in all the at church and stuff, but I feel like some people maybe take it a bit too far and they just don't they can't see the value in another perspective, uh which is hard for me to comprehend because I am pretty good at that. So
Me too. I don't understand like not integrating better practices that you come across into your own life. My whole thing has always been like, if you can show me a better way to do something, why wouldn't we do it the better way? And but there's a lot to unpack there with like religion and spirituality being both intertwined and not intertwined depending on the individual. And which is funny because religion is supposed to be purely spiritual, but you really get into it, and there's this disconnect these days between uh, what spirituality really is versus what spirituality has been marketed it as. And there's no more spiritual practice. There's not a better spiritual practice than learning yourself and really getting into who you are, how you are, why you are this way, how we're all connected, the nature, how are we
Mhm.
connected to nature? Because, and which is weird because we're so disconnected to nature in so many ways. We don't, for one, as humans, we're very different than any other thing on the planet. So that makes things weird. And concrete jungles. We've lived in cities for so long at this point that we don't really have an understanding of how that plant is connected to us, just in the general, which I think is a whole scheme on itself, honestly, because the more in tune you get with yourself and the connection you have to the world around you, the more powerful you become. And
Mhm.
we have governments and stuff, so we can't be too powerful.
Well, exactly. And I think that's part of it. A lot of the, societal programming comes from the powers that be. And, it's there to keep people feeling small so that they don't find their own power. And I think a lot of that has been suppressed over the years in a lot of ways through food, through connection to the land, through school systems and, jobs and all these different ways. And, I feel like we're kind of coming to the end of that cycle. Like, I think people are realizing that they don't want to be disconnected anymore because they don't feel good and they don't know why they don't feel good. But as they kind of, for me, as I raised my vibration, through yoga and food and other things, I started feeling better. And I didn't want to go back to doing the old ways of things because it didn't feel good. And I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of people are motivated in our modern society by comfort and feeling good. And whether that's, eating healthy food and exercising or doing other things that make them, feel better, then they're going to start seeing those shifts. And I also think a lot of the younger generation is going to be bringing that in because they already are, kind of similarly to how we did with our parents. Like I remember, my dad was always really into spirituality and he'd watch, Hay House and all other shows like that. And I'd watch it with him sometimes. And he's like, oh, isn't this like so cool? And for me, I felt like I'd already learned a lot of that. And I think he struggled with that because for him, it felt like just new, interesting stuff. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I knew about that 10 years ago. And he's like, well, how did you know? Why didn't you tell me? I just kind of assumed everybody knew it, because I'm like, yeah, the government's kind of fishy, all these other things. Like, doesn't everyone think that? But, not everyone does. So, um, but I think people are waking up and, you have events like COVID and stuff too. It casts a light on, you know, where the power lies, where the money lies. And, it's ultimately, as much as they want you to believe that's what life is about, it's not actually what life is about. And, of course, having a certain amount of money can make you feel comfortable materially, having a house, having food, like those things are important. But, feeling spiritually liberated and free and happy and feeling like you're who you're meant to be and not just a slave is way more valuable than just having money and fancy cars and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, and you're exactly right in all of those points. We are coming to the end of it. People are done. People are done. We are circling back around to the death thing. We're facing it and realizing that life is too short. The longest of lives are just too short. There's so many amazing things in this world, and we spend most of our time working away day after day so that we can scrounge up enough money to just live. And man, and it's getting harder to do that. And nobody wants to do that. And I don't mean like, we've heard for years now that, oh, nobody wants to work. And it's not really that. Most of us are totally happy working. We need a purpose. We need something to
Mhm.
do. We don't want to just sit around. But working these soul sucking jobs is not where it's at, for
Mhm.
pay that can't even buy us a house. I'm really lucky to have gotten a home before everything really started crashing, but
Mhm.
there's no way I would be able to go out and buy a home now with the income that we have and the rates being as high as they are and the market being the way it is. And people are really distraught by that.
Mhm.
And especially the younger generation, as you said, they're they don't have the illusion of, I don't know about you. Well, especially being in Canada, I'm not really sure. My generation and earlier generations were marinated in the idea of the American dream. You know, you go to school, you get a degree, you get a house, you get married, you have the white picket fence, you good job, and you just live happily ever after. And well, the younger generations coming in, that's all been that's all been like shattered. We don't That's not even a thing anymore. So for one, I envy their ability to just go against the grain in that
Mm-hmm.
sense, and just don't worry. They don't have the pressure to go to college. They can just go backpacking if they want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Well, and I think, I really saw the shift in my parents' generation. I think it was like, I want to say the 2007, 2008 recession time where they had lost a bunch of savings in the stock market, and eventually they got it back. Like they waited long enough, but the time it kind of shattered their belief in the American dream, so to speak. I mean, it's very similar in Canada, and I think they were like, "Huh, maybe all the things they told us to do are actually not true."
Yeah.
And I think that's for my parents when their sort of spiritual awakening stuff started happening. I think my dad was before that, but my mom definitely started waking up around then, and I think that's when they got into like a house and self-development and all these other things, including investing and stuff in real estate and things like that, but just really looking at like different ways of doing it rather than the narrative. And I think young people, I agree, I'm grateful they've already kind of come in with the knowledge like, hey, and I think really the American dream at its core is about freedom. And so it's
Yeah.
like, how can we be free and not so chained to the system? And like I'm grateful like that when I was growing up, my parents, I went to university right after high school, and my parents tell me to pay for it. But in Canada, I didn't realize this. It's way cheaper than it is in the States. Like my whole tuition for 4 years was like 20 grand. Whereas I think in the States it can be 10 times that. So depending
Oh
on where
yeah.
you go, right? So
Oh
I
yeah.
think, and I am grateful for my education, but truth, like I got a marketing and business degree, but I've never really used it in the way that I think it was intended. And truthfully, I've learned more about business by running my own business than I ever learned
Honestly.
in school. Like and especially in the digital age, you can go on YouTube or follow
Mm.
people that you like and learn. There's such a wealth of knowledge out there. So I think, I feel like in the new way of doing things, people are going to be more kind of taking up a consulting style role or whatever, however that looks, right? I think a lot of the old jobs are kind of going to end up leaving, and people are talking about AI coming in and getting rid of a lot of white collar jobs now. And I think people, in some ways that's a great thing. And in some ways it's not. So it just depends on who you are. But I think people are going to have to reinvent work for themselves in ways that are meaningful. And I kind of think that's what you're talking about earlier, talking about people following their purpose, finding things they're passionate about, because I think everyone has the drive to work and to contribute and participate. I know I definitely do. And I know lots of people who do. But I think if they can find ways that are fun for them, that they're passionate about, that light them up and make them feel fulfilled, that's going to lead to a much happier society. And I think one where people are sort of celebrated for their gifts rather than feeling forced to do a soul sucking job that they don't want to do just to maybe buy a house. Like, and that's the way things have kind of gotten. And, house prices have risen astronomically compared to wages. And, I think it's part of the total control scheme. And I feel like people are finding ways out of that now, the tiny house movements and nomadic living and just other ways of doing things where you just don't need the same, what was shared in the past. Like you don't need to have a giant mansion. I personally wouldn't even want to live in a giant mansion because it's too much. I'm a minimalist, so for me it would just be overwhelming. But
Me too. You'd have to clean it all. That's a lot to
well,
clean.
exactly, and it's just unnecessary. And I think people are kind of taking a look now at like what is actually necessary versus not necessary in their lives and kind of clearing house a little bit. And I think that's important because, you know, I think there's going to be a big surge and a quest for truth for a lot of people, especially as, Pluto moves into Aquarius next year. I think the next couple years, people are really going to be diving deep until, 2030 on what's really important to them and what they believe is true, and not just buying the narrative of the system, because that's been, you know, happening for hundreds and thousands of years now. So
Yeah, it's such an exciting time. Everything's changing astronomically. It is really making leaps and bounds and change. We're going to look back in 30 years and not even recognize the world anymore, which I think is awesome. I think we're going to be moving more towards, like you said, the consulting type things. People with the internet, we are able to self study whatever
Mhm.
thing we're interested in. And if you can, that's what people did 200 years ago was the unschooling. Are you familiar with unschooling, where
Yeah. Oh yeah.
they just go and study whatever they're interested in, and that produces someone who is more proficient in those subjects than any kind of college degree could ever. You go get a master's in biology, you're not going to surpass somebody who is so obsessed with biology that they're just eating, breathing, sleeping it day in and day out, can't get enough. There's and it's really frustrating. If you're looking for jobs on, if you're looking through job ads and stuff, every single one of them still want you to have those college degrees in XYZ. And I get it, because how else are we going to see if the person is qualified? But at the same time, it really puts a barrier on these apps, these people who are just genius in these subjects but can't get a job doing that subject because they don't have a specific degree about it.
Totally. And, I've definitely seen that myself, applying for jobs and being in the job market. And, I'm grateful that I do have that piece. But a lot of people, like, my wife, for instance, she doesn't have a degree at all. And she's the director of IT at their company. And so, she got herself in early, like, right, I think, when she was a teenager, and then has grown steadily just through company, kind of getting promoted because she's really good at what she does. And I think once you get your foot in the door without the degree and get some work experience, it's less relevant.
Sure.
But some people still do require you to have it. It just depends on the company. But I think it's silly because really you could learn, like you said, it's a self-study on the internet. You can learn so many skills if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
And, especially for like job and work related stuff, 90% of what you use on the job, you learn on the job in
Yeah,
most jobs. Like
honestly
you
though.
do the job, you learn it, maybe there's a couple like soft skills you need to learn, but it's not, you're gonna learn as you do. And that's most jobs. And I think employers don't, you know, maybe it's not, maybe I'm crazy, but I think employers don't realize how easy a lot of the jobs that get people do actually are. Like when I look at the job boards, I'm like, I could do most of these things or
Mm-hmm.
learn how to do it pretty quick, but I don't have a lot of the degrees they want. Like I have a business degree, but I don't have like a, you know, childhood educator's degree or something like that. There was a period of time where I was looking at like helping children with mental health, but I don't have the education to do that, like
Mm-hmm.
from the legal standpoint. So I can't do it. And, so I kind of let that go, but it's interesting because it's like I've got tons of energy healing experience and yoga experience and meditation and all these like different modalities and things that I've done over my life that I've learned through direct experience, but I don't have a degree in enlightenment, so I can't go and teach that to people, or whatever it may be, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that's why I've kind of celebrated entrepreneurship. And I've always known I wanted to be an entrepreneur. Like when I got my business degree, I also had a minor in entrepreneurship and I knew that's what I really wanted to do. And I've always been kind of, had that mind. And I have worked jobs over the years and I have done lots of side gigs and stuff too. But I feel like there's way more freedom, at least for me, in that sort of lifestyle and that way of operating. And so I really encourage people to kind of take that route if they can. It's definitely not always the easiest. And actually, it's probably harder than having a job because everything is on you now.
Yep.
But um, at the same time, like there's no boss telling you you're doing something wrong or breathing down your neck, or, you have the freedom to create it how you want it to be. But it also is a heck of a lot more work than just going to your 9 to 5. So I think it depends on what kind of person you are.
For sure, it is definitely not for everybody. uh I Yeah. I'm kind of unemployable. Like I'm not, but I am. Like I can play nice and I can do anything for a while, but I question too much. And the rules have to make sense. And I need the freedom to be able to, because I prioritize family over everything. I need the freedom to be able to, if my kids are out of school that day for a bank holiday or whatever, I don't have to go around and find a babysitter because, you know, we're really lacking in our villages these
Hmm.
days, which is
Hmm.
another thing that people are realizing that we are lonely, like literally sick, like physically ill with loneliness. And it's so prominent because we've sectioned ourselves off again, probably by design, because there's power in numbers and there's power in unity and there's power in coming together. But we were never meant to live as separately and spaced out as we do. And, there's a lot of factors with that between the nuclear family becoming the standard, which only became the standard in like the 50s. It's super new. And we hated it so much that it didn't even last 100 years. we're
Hmm.
we're breaking that down. I see more and more people moving in together than I've ever seen before, and a lot of that is the loneliness, but a lot of that also is the state of the economy and not being able to afford to live by yourself. So, my neighbors, for example, it's we get new neighbors all the time, but not from people moving out and new people moving in. It's from the people who are already living there taking in a relative.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then like there's 7 people in my house. There's me, my husband, and my 2 children. And
Hmm.
then his brother moved in with us a little over a year ago. And then my friend and her 9-year-old became displaced and they moved in with us recently. So there's 7 people in our house. And plus a very large dog. He's person sized also. So we'll count him as the eight.
Okay.
And but I get I get a lot of pushback from family that are like, oh, everybody needs their own space. That's not going to last. That's going to ruin y'all's relationships. And, you know, it's not easy. It's not a breeze. It's not effortless. Living together is not, and you can make this as big or as small as you want. That statement, living together is not easy. It takes work, but, on both sides, but it's what we're supposed to do. It's what our heart and soul knows we need to come together to help one another because the world is overwhelming and overstimulating and probably designed to be so. And the really, other than moving out into the woods, which all of us want to do, right? We all want to just 86 society and take our closest friends and family and go pitch some tents out in the middle of the woods and learn how to live off the land and build a commune and say forget everything that what's credit score. I don't want to talk about that no more. I don't. And
Totally.
but this is, you start where you're able to start with the pieces that you're given, and this is where we are. And it's been wonderful.
Totally. Well, and I can relate to that because a few years ago, me and all my siblings, like I have a family of 6, and my brother's wife, we were all together, all 7 of us, in my parents' house for a couple of years, and it was actually really amazing timing because we all had
Yeah.
sort of different things. Like I'd gone through a breakup and ended up moving back in with them for a bit, and it was actually also during the time when my dad got cancer and ended up over the course of a few years he ended up passing away. But it brought us all together for that last couple of years of life with him as a family, and so it was powerful and it was a beautiful experience, and I'm grateful that I got to have it. And there were definitely times where I'm like, oh, like I shouldn't be living with my parents at this age. Like, what's going on? Like, I got to get it together, But also recognizing, like, my mom and other people in the family, like, they needed help and like emotional support, and
Yeah.
and we all kind of stepped on each other's toes a bit sometimes, but for the
Yeah.
most part, we all also got along uh, and made it work. And after my dad passed, like I moved out, and my brothers moved out, and they all got their own places. And but during that period of time, we kind of were all brought together. And I think people, kind of don't value that as much, especially if they are family and they've been together for a long time. Like it gets kind of easier to be in a sort of, I guess it's still a neutral space, but it's easier to like get frustrated by someone else in your family or whatever. And not recognize like, that there's a reason you're probably there together. And, um, I feel like it was very healing for my family and the family line to have us all together and doing these things together and like celebrating my dad and doing that kind of stuff. But but also there's this something to be said for having your own space and being able to do that too. So I think it's just about balance and
Oh
what
yeah.
works. Because there was a lot of times where I'm like, oh, I just want to get my own apartment and go live somewhere else, but I never did, and I think that was part of the reason why. And um, it was a good experience, and I think I've lived with lots of roommates over the years and lots of different people, and it's just about finding space when you need it. Because I mean, my wife has three boys, and so they're a handful, and sometimes it's like I need to go for a nature walk. Like I'll see you guys in 2 hours. So it just depends on the person, but that's what I do. So
Absolutely, I agree. There's nothing that'll test you more than trying to coexist in close quarters with people. But there's also not much else that will fulfill your needs, like heart and soul, like being with other people. But yeah, no, you definitely need that space to be able to move around a little bit if you need to, and walk
totally,
away if you need to.
yeah, totally. Yeah, no, I definitely, and I've had to learn that over the years too, like living with my family, or living with the boys, or just whoever. It's like you've got to learn to create space for yourself too, because of course everyone has needs, and I have lived with some extroverts who want to talk my ear off for 2 hours, and I'm like, I love you, but I have stuff to do, and so there has to be sometimes some boundaries,
Yeah,
but
communication.
yeah, open communication, right? Because it's you need to be responsible for your own energy, and they do too.
Mhm.
So but it's also different people are at different levels of awareness, and I think that's really where a lot of the struggle comes from, because
Oh, sure.
some people in my family are not at the same awareness as me, and sometimes they can be very frustrating when it's like
Sure.
there's dishes on the counter for a week or whatever, and I'm like, what's going on here? Like, this is not okay, and then you have to have a conversation and or whatever, right? So um but yeah, it's always a balance, living with people, and but also that's what helps you be better as a human, because you learn all this, how to regulate your own emotions and your thoughts and your feelings and your energy, and it just, you have to. So
Yeah. I don't have anywhere to go from here.
okay, well, I feel like this is pretty complete.
I think it is too. It feels really good. This was wonderful. You want to tell people how they can find you, what kind of services and stuff you offer?
Oh, totally, yeah. I mean, the best place to stay in touch with me is my newsletter, and you can sign up at justinwestenberg.com/newsletter. And I send out a newsletter every Sunday called the Soul Seeker Sunday newsletter. And it's just spiritual guidance and new poetry every week. I'm always writing new stuff, so it's fun to share with people that way. And then in terms of like services, right now I have a Soul Seekers subscription, which is 19.99 a month. And I send out guided meditations every week, journaling questions, and really, I just help people kind of stay accountable for their daily practice of like movement, breath work, meditation, and journaling. And it's meant to help you just kind of stay focused and on track with those practices, so that you can be more aligned in all ways and with your soul. And then I have my books. You can get them on Amazon, but I also do offer up to 60% off when people buy this series on my website. Um, and I've got them in ebook, audiobook, paperback, all there. And then lastly, I also do mentorships with people. So if people want to work with me one on one as a spiritual mentor guide, I also do that as well. So yeah, that's kind of
Awesome.
what I offer. Yeah,
Cool. Yeah, because accountability I have found is the number one thing that we could offer, honestly. Like I can tell you about the tools and modalities that you need to use all day long, but actually doing it, it's the book work versus the field work. And people they want to like get stuck learning a new modality, learning a new tool, learning like, oh, now I learned meditation and now I have to learn how to journal and now I have to learn breath work and now I have to learn yoga. Well, maybe you just need to get in the floor and do it.
exactly. And what I found, like for me, when I was going through my spiritual awakening, I felt super, super alone and just overwhelmed. And it wasn't until I met someone who was like a guide and a teacher for me that it changed everything. Because when I was going through that, I felt like nobody could see me, nobody could understand me because what I was experiencing was so different than like the normal reality. And I told my friends and my family, and they kind of looked at me like I was crazy. And they're like, okay, or they brushed it off and just made no big deal of it. But I'm like, for me, this was like life changing, and they just didn't get it. And then when I met someone who was my teacher, I was like, okay, like this person can see me, she can understand me, she gets me, and I can talk to her about what's going on, and she can tell me, okay, that's normal, or oh, think about doing this or whatever. And so having that one-to-one guidance was just so invaluable for me, and that's why I decided to offer it for other people too, because I know what that feeling is like when you're going through an awakening process. You're feeling so alone and like nobody can understand you, and just having someone to just be there with you and guide you through it can make all the difference. So that's one of my that's why I love doing it, because I know how impactful it was for me.
And I agree with that entirely. You do need somebody to make you feel that, to tell you that you're not crazy, because
Exactly.
like, they look at you like you're crazy and they don't realize how big of a step that you took in confiding in them in the first place, because you don't have to tell me I'm crazy. I already think I am. I've been soaking in this craziness for a hot minute, trying to decide if I am and if I should bring it to your attention. But either way, it is a powerful experience that is bothering me. And I need someone who gets it somewhere. And that's one of the reasons I started my podcast, was to reach out and try to find people who understood things the way I did, so that I could feel not crazy. Because we're not the majority, but the scales are tipping towards us becoming the majority, which is great and beautiful and awesome. And younger generations will have the luxury of not having to seek a teacher or a friend who understands so ferociously as I know I have. I don't know how hard you had to work to find somebody, but man, living where I live, and I've always lived here, it was very hard in the beginning. And yeah, I had to find somebody. I was like, after I got on the internet and I was like, this is what's happening. And turns out it's happening to a lot of people. And we're
Mm-hmm.
not crazy, which is
Mm-hmm.
great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I was lucky where I lived was actually, I was only there for a few years, but it was like a total, it's a, it's on a huge quartz like vortex, and it's a very spiritual place. And so finding my spiritual teacher was actually really easy for me, thankfully, there. But and she was actually one of my friends, so it kind of worked out really well. But I definitely could feel like in Alabama, especially where like yoga and everything like that is just so suppressed, that anything beyond that would be even crazier. And there's a lot that's beyond that.
Oh
So
my gosh, yes.
I think I feel like it would be really hard there because you're not just going to, post on, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure people do post on social media, but I'm sure there's also a lot of backlash too. And so I feel like, and that's the beauty of the internet. You can connect with people all over the world who believe what you believe and who can support you on your journey just as you can support them. So I feel like that is a big way when we're shifting, because it's not all about, as much as I want to be connected to people around me, I also want to be connected to the people who resonate with me. And that's not always the people who live next door either, unfortunately. So, um,
Yeah. But I also believe that because you raise the vibration, your energy affects the people around you. And we're on this spiritual path to help the world, raise the vibrations of the world, find a better way of living. And because the world has been for so long stationed in the opposite direction of which we want to go, to so we're not the majority. And because we have to do this, we're more sporadically spaced out so that we can come together. And like, so I'm influencing the people around me and you're influencing the people around you, and then we come together, like it just spreads out to eventually encompass the whole world. But man, it's hard being the person doing that.
yeah, I agreed. I totally agree. And there were years where I felt totally, not seen, totally misunderstood. I'm like, why does nobody else care about this? Why does nobody else get it? Like, and it was really hard for me. And, and like even now, most of my like really close friends and family don't get it the way I do. And, they get parts of it, absolutely. But they can't quite see it all yet. And I'm not, I'm not upset, but it's just I want people to get more of it. And, especially, new people that I meet. Like some people really get it, some people don't. It just depends. But that I've attracted some people who do really get it. And that's also great because, you can talk with them about things and it's a beautiful experience to have that. So
Absolutely. No, it is hard and it's lonely, and because like, we can understand everything there is to understand, but at the end of the day, we're still human just like everybody else, and we still
totally.
need that connection just like everybody else. And but yeah, it does get lonely. That's been one of the biggest issues in my life always, is that I open my mouth and nobody understands anything that comes out of it.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think, you know, uh, it kind of ties into what I was talking about earlier, but I feel like that feeling of being alone is the biggest, sort of like the biggest trigger and the biggest like
It
what's the word? The
drive.
biggest wound or thing that a lot of spiritual people need to heal because
Mhm.
they're here to teach people how to feel connected. But in order to overcome that alone, they have to be able to overcome that aloneness before they can teach that and share that and realize that. And I think that's the journey a lot of us are on right now, is going from that state of being very, very alone to feeling connected first with ourselves and then with other people. And I think that's really, where I would be focusing most of my time, especially in that alone feeling. And, I mean, it happens. And you just got to remember your connection to yourself, connection to the universe, and all those things, because there's going to be curveballs thrown at you all the time. So,
Always. Absolutely always. But yeah, you can't teach something unless you experience it and know it to its depths, right?
exactly. Exactly. And so I think for me, that was also a real challenge in like coming out with talking about my spiritual awakening, talking about my journey, talking about the trials and things that I faced, and finding that bigger connection because, you know, I'm like, well, have I really, healed this in myself? Have I, discovered, is there more to discover? And I mean, there's always more to discover. But I think at
Mhm.
some point you just have to be open to share as well. And then trust that the people who need to hear it will hear it, and you can connect with other people no matter where they are in their journey. So
Yeah, just got to put it out there.
exactly. Exactly.
All right. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for sharing this with us and spending this time with
Absolutely.
us today.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me, Savannah. And I'm grateful to be here and grateful that I got this opportunity to speak with you guys today. So I hope you all have a beautiful day. If you've listened,
Absolutely. And I'll link all of those around here somewhere.
awesome. Okay, thanks, Savannah. I will talk to you soon.
All right.